It may surprise people to know that the AJHS has such an extensive collection of sports memorabilia. We mostly tend to focus on our miles of unique and distinctive archival materials, our tens of thousands of books, but we also have an extensive collection of sports memorabilia documenting Jewish participation in a variety of sports, from gymnastics to hockey. We have a great deal about basketball, particularly as it relates to New York City basketball, some of which is currently on view at the Museum of the City of New York's exhibition called City Game. We also have archival collections that are related to sports. We have a small collection about Mo Berg, baseball player and spy, although most of the collection relates to his wartime activities and not his baseball activities. But before we get to what you are all probably waiting for, which is Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax, and how do the 1986 Mets relate to Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax, I would like to show one of my favorite items from the collection, which documents women's participation in baseball, particularly in the Women's League. The Women's League was immortalized by the movie that was done many years back, starring Tom Hanks and Madonna, called A League of Their Own, which talks about how the Women's League was played and was formed. And we have one awesome item from the Women's League, a signed baseball from Thelma Tibby Eisen, who played on the Fort Wayne Daisies from 1944 to 1952. And we also have a picture of Tibby in her absolutely amazing Women's League uniform.
When Jews are taught basketball and baseball and these other sports or boxing in the settlement houses, what's the message? You want to be an American? Speak like an American, eat like an American, dress like an American, play music like an American, and play sports like an American. Sports are one of the ways that define community, acceptance, tolerance, and intolerance. So if you want to see how Jews are doing in America, in 3 different episodes in our history, look at the sports experience.
No collection of baseball memorabilia would be complete without materials from Hank Greenberg, the beloved Detroit Tigers baseball player with a million great nicknames: Hammer and Hank, Hankus Pankus, the Hebrew Hammer. And we are very fortunate to have an extensive collection of memorabilia related to both his sporting career and his personal life. Hank Greenberg was a New York City boy, born New Year's Day, 1911, here in Manhattan, in Greenwich Village. Originally, he turned down an offer from the Yankees because Hank Greenberg was a first baseman, and they already had Lou Gehrig at first base, and instead opted to go to NYU for a year before resuming his professional baseball career. And at the time he entered Major League Baseball, at age 19, he was the youngest player in MLB. What he is most known for, clearly, is his career with the Tigers. He led them to 2 World Series titles, one in 1935 and another in 1945. He was a 5-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champion, and also won the MVP award multiple times as well. So we're very fortunate, again, to have some great items related to Hank Greenberg's baseball career. Here we have a signed ball from the Detroit Tigers. This is 1934, which is the year that they got to the World Series, but sadly lost. They did not win their World Series title until the year after, until 1935. We also have a beautiful Greenberg jersey as well, number 5, here in the collection. But probably my favorite objects, and objects that, these kind of objects belong in the museum collection, and so we keep them in this room because this is a more secure location. So I probably should not admit this, but the fact is, every time we get these out for tours or for photographs, they stay in my office for probably a little longer than they should, because I just love to look at them, because I love to know that these were bats that were owned by such a hero and such an amazing baseball player. So here we have 3 different ones. These are various commemorative bats that were produced by the Detroit Tigers. This is when they were the American League champions in 1940, which was right before Hank Greenberg entered the armed forces. And we have ones from various other team time periods as well.
Hank Greenberg was unquestionably the greatest Jewish baseball player of his time. superseded only in terms of the Jewish mind by Sandy Koufax in the 1960s. There's one other thing about Hank Greenberg that should be noted, which I think is a bit overstated. In the 1930s, he came very close to eclipsing Babe Ruth's record. And I think it's somewhat mythological that people say that when he got to 58 home runs, the pitchers didn't want him to beat Babe Ruth's record and didn't give him a chance to break the record. I don't think Greenberg ever alleged that, but I would point out that in 1961, when Roger Maris, a Protestant from the Midwest, eclipsed Babe Ruth's record, a lot of folks didn't want him to beat the Bambino's record either. So that business with breaking records is not nearly as significant as the question of whether Hank Greenberg would play on the Jewish high holy days. I think that's a more significant moment in time in terms of the American Jewish experience.
Aside from the baseballs and the bats and the jerseys and Hank Greenberg's own high school yearbook from the Bronx, we also are very lucky to have multiple scrapbooks, and you can see these are very, very large scrapbooks, which document both Hank Greenberg's professional and personal life from the early 1930s to the late 1940s. One of the things that is documented within these scrapbooks was Hank Greenberg's refusal to play on Yom Kippur. In September of 1934, the Detroit Tigers had finally reached, we're almost at the World Series for the first time in decades. And Hank Greenberg announced that he would not play on Rosh Hashanah. As you can imagine, this was met with a mixed reaction. And so what Greenberg did is he consulted a rabbi. And the rabbi said, you know, if you're going to sit out any day for religious observance, it really should be Yom Kippur, as this is the holiest day, and it's okay to play on Rosh Hashanah. And one of the great things that comes to us from this, from these scrapbooks is a clipping which says Rosh Hashanah, and we have Hebrew letters here, and says, and so to you, Mr. Greenberg, the Tiger fans say, Happy New Year, because by playing on Rosh Hashanah, Hank Greenberg drove in 2 runs that day for the Tigers to win their game. And while he did play on Rosh Hashanah, he did sit out the game on Yom Kippur, and while he did not hear the roar of the crowds in Tiger Stadium, he did, however, supposedly get a standing ovation from the congregation whose services he attended that day.
What I'm suggesting is we should learn more about the world Greenberg lived in Detroit, which was so anti-Semitic. And when he's told he must play for his community, it's not the Jewish community, it's a larger community. It gives you a sense of the fragility of Jewish status in the 1930s.
So these incredibly thorough scrapbooks document an enormous amount of Hank Greenberg's career, largely positive coverage of the Tigers and their race for the pennant in multiple years. We are now going to cut to look at some different kinds of newspapers also being produced in Detroit right before Hank Greenberg's career and during it, that show the anti-Semitism that was also happening in Detroit and how this influenced the larger political environment around Hank Greenberg's play.
Detroit was a hotbed of anti-Semitism. In the 1920s, you had the northern version of the Ku Klux Klan there. In the 1930s, you had portions of the German-American Bund operating out of Detroit. But most importantly, you had in the 1920s Henry Ford, who brings the Protocols of the Elders of Zion to America, the scurrilous document that talks about Jewish attempts to take over the world. And then through the Dearborn Independent, what he does is apply the so-called teachings of the Protocols to the American experience. And one of the things that he harps upon is the involvement of Jews or non-involvement of Jews in baseball, the national pastime. And whereas Jews are seen in a variety of ways as corruptors of society, they're also for Ford corruptors of the national pastime. So here's the image that Ford wants to project. Baseball begins as a pastoral game. It's played on warm summer afternoons in the fields of America. It's a game that has no clock. The umpires have no clock. It's a pastoral game. And it comes to the city, becomes professionalized, and Jews get involved. Not as players. Americans are players. Jews are owners. Jews are corruptors. And once they own baseball, what do? They corrupt the American experience. And the 1919 Black Sox scandal is emblematic of that type of corruption that's in the bones of Jews. They don't play. They try to own and ultimately corrupt. So that's an image of Jews that's being projected here. So you can imagine what Hank Greenberg means to Jews who say, here's someone who's a great Jewish athlete, a great Jewish player. And finally, in the late 1930s, Father Coughlin is spewing anti-Roosevelt, anti-Jewish sentiments, and he's listened to 3.5 million people around the country Sunday evenings and talking about Jews trying to force America into World War II.
As Dr. Gurock has told us, clearly the environment in and around Detroit was most certainly rife with anti-Semitism. And a great deal of this was coming from two individuals who, prior to Hank Greenberg's career and during Hank Greenberg's career, were doing an enormous amount to stir up anti-Semitism in a variety of ways. The first of which was Henry Ford, with his notorious periodical, The Dearborn Independent. As you can see here, this one is one of the most infamous issues of The Dearborn Independent, published in 1920, which proclaims the international Jew the world's problem and discusses the literary hoax known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which posits that there's an enormous Jewish conspiracy worldwide to control every aspect of global life. Why would a newspaper such as the Dearborn Independent be so influential? How would people in New York or in Des Moines, Iowa hear of Dearborn? People infrequently underestimate the amount of Henry Ford's reach. He was incredibly wealthy, and there were Ford dealerships all over the United States. So the reach of this newspaper was bigger than you would think. And the issues of this newspaper were also condensed into book form, which was sold in multiple locations. We also here have a copy of Social Justice, which is the periodical produced by Father Coughlin, the infamous Catholic priest and radio host who at one point had an enormous amount of listeners to his radio show, who frequently spewed anti-Semitic and anti-communist propaganda regularly over the airwaves. Both of these things clearly influenced the environment that Hank Greenberg was playing in Detroit in the 1930s and 40s. So why would the American Jewish Historical Society be collecting the Dearborn Independent and the Social Justice, as well as Common Sense and other anti-Semitic periodicals of this time? All of these materials were collected by a former librarian and archivist from the American Jewish Historical Society, who amassed a large collection known as the Anti-Semitic Literature Collection. And this collection documents anti-Semitic propaganda, periodicals, books produced in the United States from the 1700s really up through the present day, including things published to this day on the internet and other more modern sources. But overall, it provides an extensive view of anti-Semitic literature and propaganda produced in the United States for hundreds of years.
Once America enters into World War II, you have Hank Greenberg and so many other baseball players, Jewish and Gentile, volunteering to fight in the Great War, giving up years of productivity on the diamond in order to be patriotic Americans. There's no better way to answer anti-Semitism by saying, look how many Jews are fighting for America.
So this series of scrapbooks documents an enormous amount of time from Hank Greenberg's life, both documenting his personal life as well as his professional life. This particular scrapbook documents Hank Greenberg's return to Major League Baseball after his wartime service. Hank Greenberg was drafted in the early 1940s and served for a short period of time, but was then released because most men over the age of 28 were released from military service because it was thought that that would not be needed. Then Pearl Harbor happened. And after Pearl Harbor, Hank Greenberg voluntarily re-enlisted, this time serving in the Air Force, where he served for 47 months, which is one of the longest terms of service of any Major League Baseball that served during World War II. Also, to clarify, he was by no means the only baseball player who served in the American Armed Forces. Both Jewish and Gentile baseball players also stepped up to serve their country during this period, this tumultuous period of United States history. But then in 1945, Hank Greenberg was discharged, came back to his beloved Detroit Tigers, hit a home run on his first game back, and then brought the Tigers to their second World Series win in 1945.
So there's again a quiet response to anti-Semitism, but highly publicized, that Greenberg is going to fight for America. And I have to say, along with Ted Williams and a myriad of other great baseball players. So maybe that's why he's so important as a response to anti-Semitism, although he didn't see himself specifically as a organizational respondent. He just lived he lived that life which Jews resonated to, because they may have had in the back of their mind what's being said about us. And in the barracks, so wars and sports, I can't emphasize enough, are community defining situations. And if you want to see how minority group is doing in America, look at their level of acceptance to play American games and their level of acceptance in terms of their participation in the armed forces, which says a lot about the differences between the Jewish experience and the African-American experience in America. There have never been any barriers except proficiency in sports for Jews being part of the national pastime, the major leagues. They may have endured, catcalls and anti-Semitic statements by players and fans, but that's not the same thing as not being allowed to play. African Americans, I mean, it's 100 years history of the Negro leagues, where some great players play because they couldn't play in the white man's game. And Jackie Robinson, one can argue, as some historians have, that the beginnings of the civil rights movement can be traced in a moment in time when Jackie Robinson is allowed to play Major League Baseball. But we also know from his autobiography that even after he is in the major leagues, he endures far more racism and anti-Semitism than Jews do.
One of the most beloved players in baseball is, of course, the great Sandy Koufax, three-time Cy Young Award winner, which is an accomplishment for any baseball player. But let's not forget that Koufax won the Cy Young Award 3 times when it was just given out league-wide, as opposed to now where it is given out national and American each have their own Cy Young Award winners. So that's quite an accomplishment. One of the things that we have, one of my favorite things, is we have his jersey from his rookie year on the Dodgers. You can see autographed by Koufax, number 32. This is one of the most popular items in our collection and has been exhibited in multiple exhibits here at the AJHS and also elsewhere. Additionally, we have a ball signed by Sandy Koufax. We also have multiple baseball cards from different years of Koufax's career. So while we have already heard about Hank Greenberg's experiences about not playing on Yom Kippur and what that meant for both him and the larger community, we are now going to fast forward a few decades in the future back to Sandy Koufax, who also famously refused to play on Yom Kippur, but was greeted with a very, very different reaction. And we're now going to go back to Jeffrey Gurock to talk to us a little bit more about the significance of this and what happened.
We fast forward to the 1960s in a more cultural, pluralistic America. Sandy Koufax decides he will not play on Yom Kippur, and America understands that a Jew might want to absent himself from the national pastime to observe the Jewish holiday. Even though Koufax does not pray, does not go to a synagogue, but he understands that's important for Jewish identity, which, by the way, makes him a hero for Jewish youngsters of that generation, of my generation. It's a signal moment about the acceptance of Jews in America. Someone can play the national pastime and still go to synagogue or temple on Yom Kippur. That is a big statement about where we are in America. And then we fast forward to 1986, and there are no Jews on the Mets, and there are no Jews on the Astros, and but some of the owners are Jewish, and Jews of New York have the sense of entitlement or chutzpah to say that the game itself should not take place on Yom Kippur. And a sports writer in the New York Times, George Vesey, says, "Don't worry, Jews of New York, the game will not take place." He predicts that God will bring down thunderstorms and lightning, tremendous rain, and he advises fans on the way to the stadium to build arks like the biblical Noah. And the game does take place, but it says a lot about where Jews are in the mind of America in 1986. And that continues down to the present day. So again, if you want to understand how a minority group is seen and doing in America, take a look at what goes on in sports, not who wins or loses, but whether or not you're allowed to play the game. Whether we're looking at Hank Greenberg in the 1930s or Koufax in the 1960s or the Mets in the 1980s, we can start talking about issues like cultural pluralism in terms of Koufax, intolerance in terms of Greenberg, and as far as the Mets are concerned, a sense that entitlement, belonging, perhaps a degree of arrogance, or saying that our holidays should be as observed as Christian holidays. My point is, we can do more with Greenberg and Koufax and Sean Green and the Mets than swinging the bat. Okay, we can use them. We can use them as educational devices to explore the American Jewish experience beyond the diamond of baseball.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start. We had so many questions in the chat. This is absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to start with the first one. So how did we get all of this memorabilia? The truth is, most of it got here long before my time, to be fair. So, but we got most of it through donations, not necessarily from the players themselves, but from people who purchased it at various memorabilia auctions, because these things are incredibly expensive, and then thoughtfully donated it to us here at the American Jewish Historical Society. So somebody asked that question early on, and I wanted to address it. Also, we are very sorry for our technical glitches. This is one of the really challenging things about doing a live show, but we still have all the content. For those of you who may have missed some spots due to our technical difficulties, we're going to sync it back up. So when it posts to our YouTube channel, you can actually watch the entire thing through in its entirety with the sound and the video together. Sorry, we're having internet connectivity issues on our end. Somebody had asked, are the scrapbooks on the internet? And one of our awesome archivists, Tanya Elder, also a Hank Greenberg fan, answered, sadly, we can't digitize them yet. And it's not because we don't want to. It's because the scrapbooks all are newspaper clippings and they are not in the public domain. And so we're not allowed by law, basically, to digitize things that we do not own. There's two more questions. Actually, one question and one comment. Were there any other Jewish major leaguers who were contemporary with Greenberg? There possibly may have been. I am not entirely certain. I'll have to ask Dr. Gurock the next time I speak to him, who was the fantastic historian of sports who was giving that fantastic historical commentary about, and that great story about Greenberg to Koufax to the Mets. But certainly, I don't think any of them were as well known as Greenberg. Greenberg was really just kind of a trailblazer in terms of major league sports and Jewish representation in baseball. Last, I think it was somebody put a comment that people wanted the series canceled. They didn't want the series canceled. They wanted their Mets to play. They just wanted the game rescheduled so that it did not fall on Yom Kippur, so that observant people could actually go to the game. That was really the issue. So don't worry, Mets fans, of which I am one, as you can see, did not want the series canceled. They just wanted the game rescheduled so it did not fall on that day, so that more and more of the fans could go. And one of the things, I'm sure there may be some more questions that come in, but before I leave, you know, I'd said when I was first showing the bats and stuff, that the bats stay in my office a lot longer than they should, and that's true. And while I don't have the bats with me today, I do have the Hank Greenberg the team signed ball from 1934. And again, you know, as a baseball fan, but also as the person who manages the collections here, I think these are just objects that are filled with magic, you know, a little bit, like just being able to look at this and know where it came from. And it's pretty amazing. And also, just so you know, so some other things that I am allowed to keep in my office: picture of Hank Greenberg with Joe Louis in Detroit. That usually hangs over my desk, but I took it down for this. And a big lithograph of Sandy Koufax. One of the nicest parts of this job is sometimes being able to put stuff like that in my office. And I see people, yes, are chiming in. I had a feeling that there were other Jewish baseball players who were contemporaries of Greenberg, but obviously Greenberg, you know, occupies a very large space in terms of the history of Jewish participation in baseball. So yes, we will absolutely send out the YouTube link once we have, again, adjusted the audio and the video back together. I am very, very sorry, everyone. You know, but again, we do these live, and we're editing together a lot of things and simultaneously, and showing objects, and me talking and our historians talking. So sometimes it doesn't go. Sometimes we, you know, hit a home run, and sometimes, you know, I wouldn't say it's entirely a strikeout, but, you know, maybe it's a walk. Let's put it that way. So thank you all for coming. If you have any other questions about our memorabilia, about our baseball collection, or about the American Jewish Historical Society in general, you can always get in touch with us here. If you look at our website, there's contact information for all of us, and we hope to see you on our next installment of Live from the Archives, which will happen in late October after the holidays, because we, like Hank Greenberg and Sandy Koufax, are also going to take a little break for the holidays. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for tuning in.